The congressional spin zone was in full force today as the acting director of national intelligence, Joseph Maguire, he testified before the House Intelligence Committee, and both Republicans and Democrats went on the attack.
The President of the United States has betrayed his oath of office, betrayed his oath to defend our national security, and betrayed his oath to defend our Constitution.
This latest gambit by the Democrats to overturn the people's mandate is unhinged and dangerous.
Maguire's appearance came just a few short minutes after that previously secret whistleblower complaint was released to the public. We learned it accuses White House officials of trying to, quote, lock down phone records of Trump's call with the president of Ukraine, arguably to cover up his solicitation of interference in the 2020 elections. But much of the hearing, to the confusion of much of the nation, I assume, focused on why exactly Maguire did not bring that report to Congress when he first got it, even though it appears the law requires him.
It was not stonewalling. I didn't receive direction from anybody. I was just trying to work through the process and the law the way it is written. I have to comply with the way the law is, not the way some people would like it to be. And if I could do otherwise, it would have been much more convenient for me.
We'll get to that issue in a minute. But then, of course, there are the underlying allegations as well, with a whistleblower complaint detailing what he or she saw as efforts to cover up records of Trump's July 25th phone call with the president of Ukraine. The complaint claimed that, quote, senior White House officials intervened to lock down all records of the phone call by taking the transcript out of the computer system in which transcripts are typically stored, moving it to a separate, much more restricted system, otherwise used to store and handle classified information. As for Trump's response to it all,
it's a disgrace to our country. It's another witch hunt. Here we go again.
Indeed, but it's worth keeping in mind that this time around, the inspector general who reviewed the complaint and found it credible was appointed by Donald Trump. I'm joined now by Bruce Singal. He's a defense attorney who worked along with Robert Mueller in the U.S. Attorney's Office in Boston. Bruce, good to see you. Kevin Martin is a partner at Goodwin Procter, who once clerked for Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia. It's good to see you, too.
Good to see you, too.
Thanks for being here. So before we get into the content of the whistleblower's letter, let's hope we're not going to lose people in legal stuff, but we'll do it for a minute. Here's the chair of the committee, Adam Schiff.
So you went to the White House first. So you went to the subject of the complaint for advice first about whether you should provide the complaint to Congress. You chose to go to a department led by a man, Bill Barr, who himself is implicated in the complaint and believes that he exists to serve the interests of the president.
So it does seem a little fox chicken coop-ish. Does Schiff have a point there, Bruce?
I think he's got a very good point. The law says if it's an urgent and credible matter, then it shall be reported to Congress. It doesn't say not if it's about the president.
But Maguire, when he was reading the language, suggested he's not denying that it's urgent. That's not relevant. He would argue that the urgent concern language doesn't apply to a situation with the president. So whether he's right or it's a legitimate issue to look at, is it not?
I don't think it's a legitimate issue. Once you determine the level of significance that he ascribed to it, I think it clearly meets the urgent definition and should have been turned over immediately to Congress.
Was Schiff onto something, Kevin?
I really don't think so. The urgent definition is specific to matters of national intelligence. And what the Director of National Intelligence said, he determined, consulting with the all-star team of lawyers at the Office of Legal Counsel, which is the group in the White House which answers these types of questions, is that this was not really a national intelligence issue. This may have been some other criminal issue, and so it was referred appropriately to the Justice Department.
I want to step back from this for a second and try to be much more objective than virtually anybody was today at this hearing. Number one, if there was concern on the part of Maguire about whether the president would claim executive privilege, even though he apparently has not yet, where else do you go? I mean, I'm troubled by the notion that you do go to the target of the complaint to seek his lawyer's opinion as to whether or not you should proceed with this thing. But since executive privilege can be claimed, hopefully illegitimate, where else would Maguire have appropriately gone?
That is the place to go. You don't have in a government headed by a president individual directors of national intelligence making their own decisions.
So how do you deal with the conflict issue? There is a conflict, I would argue. The report is essentially accusing the president of misdeeds, and the president's lawyers are the ones who are determining the legal issue.
Well,
that seems not to be kosher.
What the president's lawyers said was this should go to the Department of Justice, and it did go to the Department of Justice.
Yeah, but Bill Barr is also implicated in this thing. I mean, what do you do about that? That's another chicken coop fox kind of deal.
The way the statute is framed, it is a matter within the discretion of the intelligence agencies. And it seems to me that they should have gone to their own lawyers within the intelligence agencies, made a determination as to executive privilege without going to the subject or target of the investigation.
Why didn't, I mean, it seems to me that if you do go to the Department of Justice, as all three of us are just describing, isn't the appropriate remedy, for lack of a better expression, on the part of the Attorney General is to recuse himself, like his predecessor did in the Russia investigation? I may end up being a witness here. I am named repeatedly, both by the President in the phone call and in the whistleblower's report. So you recuse yourself and let somebody who's not potentially implicated get involved in the thing, right?
Well, there's recusal and there's recusal.
What does that mean?
What that means is you can recuse yourself and still give guidance and direction as to how you want the matter dealt with, even though you're staying out of it.
Well, how about Sessions' kind of recusal, where he wasn't supposed to be doing any of that kind of thing? Wouldn't have that been the appropriate splitting of the baby on the part of Barr here?
Well, and honestly, I don't know how far up the food pole this went within the Justice Department. Ultimately, the criminal division decided there wasn't evidence of a crime here.
Yeah, but they work for the boss, who hasn't recused himself, so it's always in your head,
well,
isn't it?
That's what happens when you have an executive branch with one president leading it.
You know, one last thing here, and this may not be totally relevant to the legal issue. I am obsessed with this exchange between Kamala Harris and Barr when he was testifying, not in his confirmation hearings, but during the Mueller thing. And obviously it becomes much more relevant in light of the president. The definition of is. Does that not make you uncomfortable?
That was a bit of an odd exchange, although I haven't seen the full context for it.
Yeah, but does that not make you question his credibility on the? It is a pretty direct question.
It is a direct question.
How about you?
The pregnant pause there made me feel like he was desperately searching for an answer without giving up the goods, so to speak.
I've done that many times in my life. That's why I can recognize it.
And I've seen you do it, by the way.
Can we move to the subject of the substance of the whistleblower's report? President described the phone call as perfect, his words, said more than once he was totally transparent. Whistleblower describes, as I said, this attempt to lock down the transcript of the call into a separate secret system. That's, to me, I'm not playing lawyer here, I'm playing relatively informed citizen. That's sort of the classic definition of an attempted cover-up, is it not?
And sometimes the cover-up is worse than the crime. This is, I think, one of those situations where maybe the crime is worse than the cover-up.
So what do you make of this language, this lockdown thing? They were, I mean, despite his public pronouncements, immediately after the call, his staff is trying to segregate this transcript.
Well, and look, the whistleblower is providing third-hand information. The whistleblower did not himself or herself witness that, so I don't know how much credit to give that. But at the end of the day, while people sometimes, again, like to focus on cover-ups because they're easily understood, here, if you just look at the language of the transcript itself, it's bad enough without even getting
President's own words.
The President's own words.
You know, but when you get one last thing with you, though, Kevin, when you speak to the credibility of the second-hand and third-hand information, the whistleblower nailed the phone call almost as if he had seen the transcript that we ended up seeing a couple days ago. Doesn't that add to his credibility? That was a month before the world knew about this thing, yes?
Right, but the transcript's on paper, right? So you can nail that. The behind-the-scenes maneuvering is a little harder to know what was going on there.
Cover-up is an appropriate way to describe it, isn't it, for a well, I'm sort of not a lay person, but a semi-lay person?
Well, certainly. The fact that we learned from the report that was unclassified today that they put in a separate computer system reserved for high security matters. I won't call it it's not a transcript, it's a memorandum or summary of the conversation. That is a cover-up, yeah.
Yeah, before we get to the bottom line here about what should Congress do, I was thinking about you today, actually, when I knew you were coming, and I was thinking about your former boss as I'm watching this horrible hearing, in my estimation, where not one single Republican could even say something like, you know, even though I'm far from convinced that the president has violated the Constitution, this does raise questions that concern me. This does raise issues which I think merit further investigation. The reason I mention you is I'm thinking of Scalia, the rock-ribbed conservative, joining with the liberals on flag burning or calling them as he saw them. Does that not drive you nuts as an American?
And look, and if you go back to the Saturday Night Massacre, right, in the 1970s, you had people take principled stands and step down. And this seems like the kind of situation with this whistleblower where the Republicans do need to step up and do the right thing.
And speaking of right thing, why is there not a person in the White House? These may be unanswerable questions. Who's going to play John Dean and say there's a cancer on this presidency? Why isn't one human being, not a whistleblower in anonymity, not writing an op-ed for the newspaper, but standing up and saying, as a matter of patriotism, if all this is true, and it is, there are allegations by the whistleblower, this is unconscionable, this is a violation of this man's oath. Why are they not doing this?
Wouldn't that be nice? But the reason is that they're afraid of their boss.
Speaking of the boss, so based upon what you've learned the last couple of days, based upon the allegations in the whistleblower report and in the transcript or the summary of the phone conversation, has the president committed impeachable offenses?
Absolutely.
Why do you say that with such certainty?
Well, I say with such certainty because we have two different aspects. We have the crime and the cover-up, certainly anybody who reads that memorandum of the conversation would only conclude it was inappropriate to be using his official power to seek information for political advantage.
Did he commit impeachable offenses?
I completely agree.
If
you look at the conversation alone, in my view, providing defense systems to a country that's facing off against Russia, to that country providing information for the president to use for his own domestic political purposes, is exactly the kind of thing that the framers were concerned about back in the 1700s when they created this notion of high crimes and misdemeanors.
Even with no explicit quid pro quo, just what the president's words signify?
I'm not sure there isn't an explicit quid pro quo.
By what?
Well, when you look at the president of Ukraine saying, we would like to buy weapons from you, and the president saying, I have a favor to ask, though, that seems like a quid pro quo.
I'd like you to argue that case. Kevin, it's nice to see you.
Nice to see you,
really
too.
Appreciate it. Bruce, be well.
Thank you.
Great to see you both.